We'll have open, rational debates. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, "Nana, stop arguing." I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different. Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Hello, good evening, it's me, Patrick Christie's, identifying as the formidable Jacob Rees-Mogg. A massive shout out to all of our viewers in India. If you don't know what I mean, check Twitter. But on State of the Nation tonight, we're going with the news that broke about an hour ago. One of the least shocking news stories of the year is that the Wagner warlord Yevgeny Prigozhin, apparently, who tried to launch a military coup against Vladimir Putin, is thought to have mysteriously died in a plane crash, which means that I have lost the office sweepstake because I had slips and falls out of multi-storey window on my card. Now, not even the powers of the Prime Minister are enough to stop the tyrannical terror of Sadiq Khan's ULEZ expansion today. Lawyers told the PM that an attempt to overrule the expansion would fail in court. This comes after the Mayor of London ramped up his sinister countdown across London. I will be speaking to one of the capital's Assembly members who opposed the expansion in the town hall, and a meteorologist who thinks that ULEZ is the best thing since sliced bread. Good debate to kick us off. Only 3 nations have ever successfully landed on the moon. And India, where I have lots of friends and viewers, joins them as the 4th, making history as the first nation to land on the lunar South Pole. This mission cost the Indian government around 63 million quid, apparently. Well, at least they will have 2.2 billion left from the 2.3 billion we have given them in foreign aid, actually. So there we go. Maybe they could use that to prevent 2 million children dying before their 5th birthday. Lovely stuff. You can tell I'm quite passionate about this, can't you? Researchers are concerned that if a Labour government were to come into power, their legislation on transgender ideologies could have serious implications for freedom of speech. Again, I will have another top debate on that a little bit later on. And millions of pounds worth of ancient artefacts were stolen from the British Museum. Well, Greece has renewed its calls for the Elgin marbles to be returned there after they claim that the British Museum can't keep them safe. And with respect, I think on balance they might have a point. State of the Nation starts now. I'll also be joined by a robust panel this evening. Benedict Spence, journalist and writer for The Telegraph and New Statesman, to name but a few. He's everywhere. And the former editor of Labour List. It's Peter Edwards. As always, I want to hear from you. It's the most important part of the programme. Email me, mailmog@gbnews.com. Get in touch, get yourself on the telly. But now it's time for the news of the day with Rhiannon.
Patrick, thank you. Your top stories from the GB newsroom. Russia says Wagner boss Yevgeny Prigozhin may have been among 10 people killed in a plane crash north of Moscow. These images are purportedly the moment the plane fell out of the sky. 8 bodies have been found at the crash site, according to a Russian news agency. It's not yet been confirmed if Prigozhin's was among those bodies. It's understood the aircraft was en route to St. Petersburg with 7 passengers and 3 crew members on board. The White House says Joe Biden has been briefed on the crash. Administrators for Wilko have denied claims by the GMB union that the stricken retailer will close the majority of its stores next week, calling it speculation. The union, which represents more than 3,000 of the company's staff, said earlier it was told a raft of redundancies would follow. Wilko tumbled into administration 2 weeks ago, putting the future of its 400 shops in doubt. Former NatWest Chief Executive Dame Alison Rose is set to receive a £2.4 million pay package a month after quitting. Dame Alison resigned following the row over the closure of Nigel Farage's bank account, but is still working her 12-month notice period. Investigations into her actions are still ongoing after she admitted discussing personal banking details with a journalist. The company says it will continue to review her planned pay and bonus payouts based on its findings. A lawyer for the parents of babies attacked by convicted killer Lucy Letby says they were fobbed off by a hospital boss. The former medical director of the Countess of Chester Hospital, Ian Harvey, has been accused of shamefully failing to address their concerns. He's since apologised for not communicating more fully at the time. Experts are hailing the UK's first womb transplant as a medical milestone. A 34-year-old woman in England received the organ from her older sister and is now planning to undergo IVF later this year. The operation at the Churchill Hospital in Oxford took around 17 hours. Around 50 babies have been born worldwide following womb transplants. And India has become the first nation to land near the moon's south pole.
देख सकते हैं कि हम लैंडर मॉड्यूल
The history-making Chandrayaan-3 is hoping to find samples of water-based ice on its mission, which scientists say could support human habitation. The country is only the 4th to achieve a soft landing on the satellite. Prime Minister Narendra Modi called it the victory cry of a new India. The UK Space Agency has congratulated the Indian Space Research Organisation on its success. This is GB News across the UK, on TV, in your car, on digital radio and on your smart speaker by saying play GB News. Now, it's back to Patrick.
Yeah, well, have you just heard this big developing story? The Wagner Group boss, Yevgeny Prigozhin, is thought to be dead after a plane flying from Moscow crashed. Prigozhin's name was included on the plane's 10-person passenger list. It's also been reported that 8 bodies have been found at the site of the crash, but 2 bodies are still thought to be missing. It is actually 2 months to the day since the Wagner uprising, which saw Yevgeny Prigozhin lead a rebellion against Vladimir Putin, stating that he would storm Moscow. Unfortunately for him, the coup only lasted 24 hours, with Putin classing the revolt as treason. Now, it was reported that a deal was struck between Prigozhin and Putin with assurances that there would be no prosecution. And yet, remarkably, here we are. I'm joined now by the chair of the Foreign Affairs Select Committee, Alicia Kearns. Look, thank you very, very much. It is a developing story, a lot of unknowns at the moment. What do we know or strongly suspect so far?
Well, what we know is that for Putin, there is one unforgivable sin, and that is what he perceives to be betrayal of himself and his Russia. Look, we know that Putin hunts down those he perceives as traitors, be it Alexander Litvinenko or the Skripals, even on British shores. So it's not really a surprise now that we see him attempting to murder Prigozhin. There have been questions over the last few hours about whether or not Prigozhin was dead, because it appears that 2 jets took off and 2 jets have now landed. And there's no absolute confirmation that he is dead, but it is highly likely.
OK, so you obviously, as the chair of the Foreign Affairs Select Committee, have not been given any absolute confirmation yet. It is simply strongly suspected, I suppose, that seems to be the case. As you've said, Putin was always really going to seek some kind of retribution, wasn't he, I think?
Absolutely. Look, he is sending a very clear message with the shooting down of this jet. 1, I do not accept betrayal. 2, I will accept and tolerate no threat to me. And thirdly, a reminder to all that I remain in control. What we do know is that there were 2 bangs, which we see from the video, and that's consistent with a surface-to-air missile. But that is really all we know at this point, and this story is by no means over. I mean, what happens to those who continue to support Prigozhin? Will we have the Russian government further try to confirm that Prigozhin is definitely dead? Because there will be those, of course, particularly with that second jet, who will say, well, maybe he isn't dead. Maybe this is his way of disappearing. We just don't know at this point.
No, indeed. And again, I just want to clarify something that you've said there, which is, whilst this is a fast-moving news story with no doubt a few more twists and turns in the tail, you think that it is suspected that this jet was shot down?
Yes, so the 2 bangs are consistent with a surface-to-air missile. We've seen many videos online where there are 2 bangs, so that does appear to be the situation. But at the same time, we also know that the Wagner network and others know that 2 bangs would be consistent. So if they wanted to mock this up, they would be able to. But the reality is it does look like Prigozhin has been taken out, and it has been done in a very purposefully obvious and public manner to send a message to anyone who dares stand up to Putin. Because Putin has been feeling threatened. He has been feeling undermined because of the success of the Wagner network's march on Moscow.
Just one more quick one with you, Alicia, please. Well, I've got you. What could the consequences of this be for Ukraine and Britain? On the face of it, potentially 1 bad guy dead, however, maybe killed by another quite bad guy. So what's the situation going to be?
Unlikely to be any winners. The only benefit might be further disarray on the front lines in Ukraine, where you saw continued Wagner network units operating, because of course there will be great anger from some of them. But the likelihood is, look, this is 2 warlords fighting it out, taking one another out. The only guarantee, the only thing we've really learned is Putin continues to be as vicious as he ever was. He will continue to take out traitors, and that you cannot trust a word this man says, because 2 months ago he promised Prigozhin a guarantee of safety if he left for Belarus. He did that.
Alicia, I appreciate you coming on, especially at such short notice, to give your up-to-date reaction to that big developing story. Alicia Kearns there, the chair of the Foreign Affairs Select Committee. More on that as we get it. Now, on a more domestic note, Rishi Sunak was advised by lawyers not to take Sadiq Khan to court over his plans to expand ULEZ into Greater London. Now, many people think that he should have done this. ULEZ is seen by some as a way, obviously, of combating pollution, saving lives. It's seen by others as an undemocratic climate grift that will impact the poorest in society for next to no benefit to the environment and should be stopped immediately. I'm pleased to say that I'm joined now by London Assembly member for Croydon and Sutton, Neil Garrett, and meteorologist Jim Dale. Both of you, thank you very much. I hope we have a quite spicy debate here. I will start with you, Neil, if that's all right. Which side of this fence are you on? Good for the climate or bad?
Well, interestingly, the Mayor never makes any climate-related claims about ULEZ. He's very careful only ever to talk about clean air. So that's the first thing, is that there's no connection there at all. I think the frustration I have is, this is a question I tried to ask the Mayor at MQ last November. I said, if the case for ULEZ is so solid, why do you have to make it in such a kind of weaselly and dishonest way? And I was not allowed to ask this. This question was ruled out of order. But I think the question stands. The evidence in favour of it keeps kind of collapsing. The claims that he makes that poor people don't own cars just aren't true. And if it's such a solid case...
Well, I mean, that's kind of the question, really, Jim, isn't it? Which is that if there is such a solid case that this is going to save lives and help the environment, why did he have to do things like try to pump out his own version of the climate science on this? Why did he have to buy the cameras before having a public consultation? You can see how it looks, can't you?
The implementation, perhaps, is a point. I would agree that it's been difficult. Even Keir Starmer suggested that, I think, after the Uxbridge election, that there was some parts of what the Mayor was trying to do that were perhaps in the wrong order and not in the way. But actually, the bigger picture is one of saving lives, of... I think about this in a common sense sort of way. Who wants pollution at the end of the day? And if we can reduce it by a little bit, whatever it is, nobody's going to deny, or very few people would deny, that what comes out the backside of a car is essentially poison. And if we can reduce poison by a little bit and a bit more, then that's the direction of travel we all want to take. I got no problem with that.
All right, Neil, well, how would you respond to that then?
I mean, I think that's true. The difficulty is, so most things in politics are a trade-off, aren't they, between two competing needs. On the one hand, there were of a cost of living pressures, enormous cost of living pressures that people are feeling. Right at this moment, this is not the time to impose on people either the cost of a new car or £12.50 a day just to go to work or go about their business. That's completely unaffordable for many people. Now, the justification for that from the Mayor would be, this is worth it, as Jim says, this is worth it because of the health benefits. The challenge I would put is those health benefits are small. We've had multiple bits of research that come out that either place them as negligible or very, very small. And the question is that very small improvement, say 1%, 2% improvement in public health, worth it for the huge cost of living pressure?
Is it worth it?
Yeah, of course it's worth it. Any movement in the right direction is always worth it. There was a time, when not too long ago, smoking in pubs and restaurants was
with respect to that, it didn't cost people money to not smoke in a pub.
I think landlords would disagree. They said they had to build outside places and what have you.
OK, but it didn't cost someone £12.50 a day to...
No, well, if we're talking the financial side of it, as I said, the mechanics perhaps were not where they needed to be. I know there's a £2,000 compensation scheme for the older cars. Scrappage, yeah. But if we look at where the actual poison has actually come from, it's come from fossil fuel. Who are the big players in that? They are the oil companies. If you want to find places where to get the money from, go there, knock on the door and say, Rishi Sunak, knock on their door. He'll never do it. He'll never do it because he's weak and he's essentially being held hostage by half his party.
When you talk there about Rishi Sunak being weak, I can see you pulling a little face there, which I understand, but maybe people would have wanted him, even if he knew he was going to lose, to take this to court.
I would have wanted him to try. I think I would have wanted him to try. And I think what I would say to Jim is that I think it's very easy to sort of wave away the cost of living pressures. I mean, come and talk to some of the people who live in the bits of outer London that I represent. They're not necessarily wealthy people. They're not people who are, going to high-powered jobs in the city. They're travelling around, they're being hairdressers, they're being carers. £12.50 a day is a completely unaffordable cost. It's, I think, intended to be an unaffordable cost. It's intended to be a sort of punishment beating for people not to use their car. It falls very heavily on people with older cars, which is not me. It may well not be you.
It is me.
So
I'm getting ripped off left, right, and centre.
So why is the Prime Minister not knocking on the doors of the likes of Shell and Esso and all the rest of them and saying, OK, guys, we've got a problem here. It's a financial problem. You're saying it's a financial problem. Well, I think we agree on the health and the pollution problem. I don't think there's too many people out there who would disagree.
I'm not sure we do. So TfL commissioned some research that said the air pollution would reduce by about 2%. And the health impacts of things like asthma diagnoses and lung cancer would reduce by about 1%.
I'll tell you what, Neil.
Zero.
I'll tell you what.
It's not
final point, Jim.
Yeah, let's go and stand on Marylebone Road for a day, OK? I'll wear a mask. You don't wear a mask. Let's do the monitoring on a calm day and let's see how we go and let's see how you feel like at the end of the day.
I get that, but you do make the point that is already in the ULEZ, which I do understand. Look, chaps, thank you very much. I really did enjoy that. It's great. No, but that is both sides of this debate, right? And I know that's where a lot of people are at. So thank you both very, very much. That was London Assembly member for Croydon and Sutton, Neil Garrett, and meteorologist Jim Dale. And when Tuesday rolls around, and again, I just want to emphasise, for anybody who's watching this, as probably most people are who are not in London, the reason why we bang on about this is because I've got a strong feeling this is going to come to a town or a city near you, as I keep saying, and so, the conversation starts here, and you might be having it where you live very, very shortly. But mailmog@gbnews.com is that email address. Get in touch, get yourself on the telly. Coming up, against my better judgment, we have sent India billions for them to have potentially spent it on a moon landing, in a way, not quite. But do we need to rethink our approach to foreign aid? Let me know what you think, as apparently loads of people from Mumbai are.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News.
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, nah, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different. Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. You'll be getting in touch with your thoughts. Let's go to a couple of those. These are all on ULEZ. So Peter says, Rishi Sunak should have challenged the expansion of ULEZ in the courts to try and delay it going ahead or stop it altogether. OK, your view, Peter. Paul says, why is it that all cars have an MOT and pass or fail on emissions? So why are some cars targeted by ULEZ? Look, Paul, I get what you mean there. I'm sure somebody will have an answer for you. That is not necessarily me. However, the older cars and diesel cars, of which that is moi, are getting absolutely clobbered in this, as are van men as well. But, and women, modern world. Now, one small step for man, one giant foreign aid bill for the UK. Congratulations to India on successfully landing on the south pole of the moon. It sounds like they've got a bit of spare cash to spend, doesn't it? So perhaps they could return the £2.3 billion in foreign aid money that we sent them between 2016 and 2021. Or, at the very least, the UK government should have some respect for hard-working British taxpayers and hold on to the 57 million quid that is due to be given next year for domestic issues. After all, there's plenty to choose from: broken NHS, cost of living crisis, persistently high inflation. Look, it makes an absolute mockery, in my view, of people's hard-earned money to be giving it to countries with vast sums to spend on firing rockets into space. Joining me to discuss this is my esteemed panel, journalist and writer Benedict Spence, and the former editor of Labour List, Peter Edwards. Benedict, I will start with you. There is a strong case for foreign aid. Do you not think this maybe makes a bit of a mockery of that?
I think we need to remember that India isn't a sort of a poor, impoverished country that we have sort of a moral responsibility to. It is now a superpower of sorts, which we are trying desperately, in fact, to sign trade agreements with. It is a country that we want to keep on side. It is also a country that is very important in the more global opposition towards China. So one shouldn't look at this so much as a case of giving money to the poor in India whilst there are poor people struggling here in the UK. You should effectively think of it almost as a bit of a bung, as a bribe.
Should we just call it that then? That's the thing, isn't it, right?
Well, of course, that's not very polite. It's not very polite to say that we are just giving our Indian friends money to play nice with us. For diplomatic reasons, that has to be sort of couched differently. It's a different question when you consider countries like Pakistan or India or Afghanistan, for example. But it is important to keep a country like India on side. I mean, there's been all sorts of talk this week about BRICS, about the attempt to realign parts of the developing world away from the dollar and the West. And India is a very important part of that. So keeping India, if you like, as a sort of a gateway into that system, which is also propped up by China and Russia, is important to maintain.
Peter, can you understand why British taxpayers look at this? And it's not just India, to be fair. You know, as Benedict was saying there, we've given a huge amount of money to Afghanistan, Pakistan, Syria, and that had to be reined in because we found out that was literally going to a terror group. You know, we are not particularly good at spending taxpayers' money abroad.
We could get better at it, certainly. So we're all a bit poorer in Britain, or nearly all of us, as a result of the cost of living crisis. That's just a fact. But I differ with Benedict in that we do have a moral responsibility to India because of the grievous misdeeds carried out by British Empire. Much like the Caribbean. And some will say that is irrelevant because it's so long ago. But the economic gain to us has been long-lasting and the economic detriment to them has been long-lasting as well. The other point I'd make briefly is there's vast inequality in India between, you're right, growing economy, prosperous middle class, but still enormous hardship with tens, if not hundreds of millions of people trapped in hardship. So do we walk by on the other side or do we do something about it?
And why is that? Is that because, of the legacy of the British Empire? Or is that because India has a caste-based system that is horrifically racist and deliberately keeps great swathes of its own population in poverty based on a racial hierarchy? Because actually, I don't think that is our responsibility. I think that is the responsibility of India to maybe sort that out for themselves. They have had independence for a very long time. They have done phenomenally well as a result of the investments that were made actually by the British Empire. Before the British got there, it was incredibly difficult to think about this country as an industrialised one. We left it in a much better state, and you can sort of take individual issues around, say, conquest or wars that happen. You're always going to get atrocities that happen there, but actually, long-term, you have to think about what is India? Is it still some poor, pleading vassal state, or has it had a long time to turn itself into a superpower? I'd say the latter.
What is very obvious, if you check my Twitter feed at the moment, is that there is a vast swathe of Indian Twitter users who completely agree with you, Peter, who say that we have pillaged their country and we've benefited massively over the course of decades and decades and decades, and actually we just need to cry harder when it comes to foreign aid.
Well, I wouldn't use that phrase, but I think you've got to think about how the aid budget is spent. Traditionally, I think we've spent it on stuff like building big things like factories and schools, because capital investment is a visible sign of getting a bang for our buck or our sterling. But I think there's enormous amounts of misogyny, sadly, in India, in pockets of society, and we've seen that trip over into sexual violence in recent years, which is terrifying. So also investing in things like education is very important. The other point I make briefly is you quoted £57 million, right? So in the context of government spending in the UK of around £1 trillion, that is peanuts.
I get that, but then you add it on top of everything else, don't you? And then you add it on top of things like the migrant crisis, and you add it on top of things like weapons for Ukraine, etc., etc., etc. I'm not saying that's a bad thing. I'm just saying you add all of these things up. And right now, Benedict, I think it starts to look... The British taxpayer, it's been made very easy for the British taxpayer to say, when's my turn?
I think I'd also just like to go back to the idea that Britain sort of profited massively from ownership of India. I mean, you're from the Lancashire part of the UK.
Roughly, yep.
My family was from Merseyside. Merseyside lost out to Manchester as a result of the ship canal, and then Manchester's mills, a lot of them went out of business because they were outcompeted by Indian mills. This is the reality of the situation, is that we did not sort of cream all the good stuff and India was left impoverished. Actually, it existed in a global economy. Some things prospered, some didn't. And actually, if you're going to sit back and say Britain did fantastically well out of the empire, you do have to sort of sit back and go, all right, well, what happened? Because right now, actually, Britain is sliding. We don't really see many of the benefits, whereas a lot of our former colonies are improving massively as a result of the infrastructure that we left them. If you want to talk specifically about the amount of money that is being taken out of the economy, again, I would point on the subject of Ukraine. It is about a broader context of aligning ourselves against countries like Russia in that case, and that is important. Other countries, perhaps less so, but India, Ukraine, these are important partners.
And Peter, just final word from you on this. If we were to maybe follow your thoughts to their natural conclusion, then would Britain end up paying vast sums of money to every single country we'd ever had anything to do with in our history?
No, I don't think so. But I think Britain has a moral responsibility to countries where it's inflicted bloodshed, and India and parts of the Caribbean are pretty high on that list.
OK, both of you, thank you very much. We're off to an absolute flyer. Benedict Spence there and, of course, Peter Edwards as well. Make sure that you let me know what you think, as I'm sure you will be doing in your droves. mailmarg@gbnews.com. When I come back, I'm going to be talking about whether or not Labour will stifle your free speech based around whether you think a man is a man and a woman is a woman. I will also be asking whether or not you think it's OK for a man to have a womb transplanted into him and then to give birth. Stay tuned.
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed boilers, proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hi there, it's Aidan McGibbon here from the Met Office with the GB News forecast. Showers for many of us over the next 24 hours, even across southern areas where it has been relatively warm and fine over the last few days. It's going to turn cooler as low pressure starts to sink south. As that happens, some intense heat over the near continent will spark some thunderstorms through the evening and overnight, those affecting northern France, but some showery activity could just spread into southwestern parts of England and then eventually other parts of the English Channel coast overnight. Some heavier rain also affecting much of central and northern Scotland. In between, a lot of cloud cover and a warm night for many, especially towards the south. But it's in the south where we're going to see some lively activity first thing, some heavier rain predominantly, with the thunderstorms that develop across northern France generally staying around the Channel or across the near continent. Much of that moves out of the way, but still some showery rain for the southeast into the afternoon. Heavy rain moves through northern Scotland, replaced by showers. Showers also affecting Northern Ireland, but actually for northern England, West Wales, southwest England by the afternoon, plenty of fine and bright weather to come. Feeling a bit cooler, and Friday's certainly a cooler day across the UK. Low pressure will bring a northwesterly airflow, a bright start to the southeast, but elsewhere a lot of showers coming through on a brisk northwesterly breeze. In between, some sunny spells and a similar setup for Saturday. A mix of sunny spells and showers and cool for many.
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed boilers, proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
The Live Desk with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Pip Thompson. It's here Monday to Friday on GB News.
From midday, we'll bring you the news as it breaks, whenever it's happening and wherever it's happening, from across the UK and around the world.
Refreshing, feisty, but with a bit of fun too.
If it matters to you, we'll have it covered on TV, radio and online.
Join the Live Desk on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Co, we tackle the issues of the day with real robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is two new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not
believe in prisons?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In a world of dull and predictable radio and TV shows.
Oh, hi. On Mark Dolan tonight, we've got big guests. We drill into the big stories of the day. The show adds up to a brilliant listening and viewing experience. Mark Dolan Tonight is the most entertaining current affairs show ever, and that's a fact. That's Mark Dolan Tonight, Friday, Saturday and Sunday from 9. Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Like all families, we have arguments every now and then, but actually we agree on what the mission of GB News is, and that's the most fundamentally important thing.
GB News provides the kind of platform that lets all voices be heard. We don't hold back. We're free to say what we really think.
Just because some people who live in a tiny little Westminster bubble think that their particular story is important, that's not the most important story for me.
And often there will be difficult stories, stories that you won't find on the establishment media.
Because what people think in the north of England may be very different to what they're thinking in the home counties.
We're going to carry on telling the world what life is really like for households up and down the UK.
We love to be in your car, in your kitchen as you're having your breakfast. Whatever you're doing, you are part of the show. If it matters to you, it matters to us.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. I remain Patrick Christys, and you've been getting in touch with your thoughts. Yet again, I would like to thank all of my friends in Mumbai for emailing in. Richard, not one of the people from Mumbai, says, one of the fastest growing economies in the world and one of the world's biggest polluters, and we give 54 million pounds a year. Oh, and by the way, we also still give money to China, complaining about the amount of foreign aid that we give. We've had that chat. Yep, Jeff says the people who are solely to blame for giving India billions are also the disgusting British politicians, and they should be held accountable. Well, I mean, that's the joy of having elections, I suppose, Jeff, really, is that we can hold them to account if you so wish. Now, a new report by the IEA highlights some of the concerns with the pervasive gender ideology in our country. There are claims that gender-critical views, such as denying the ability of people to change sex through an act of gender self-identification, constitute hate speech and, as such, should be prosecuted. Concerns that potential new hate speech legislation could have serious implications for free speech are not unfounded. Joining me is Reem Ibrahim, Communications Officer for the IEA, and, of course, my panel as well, journalist and writer Benedict Spence and the former editor of Labour List, Peter Edwards. Firstly, I'll turn to you on this, Reem, obviously. So, look, what's the crux of this report? Because people say, well, you know, are you just bashing Sir Keir and the Labour Party? Realistically, how on earth are they going to stifle my free speech for saying a woman is a woman and a man's a man?
Well, fundamentally, the report is about freedom of expression and the threat that this ideology is now being used in order to try and stifle free speech. Now, what is the situation at the moment? We've already got, in 2019, Thames Valley Police effectively said that they were going to prosecute, under the Public Order Act, anybody that was to distribute materials that defined what a woman was from the Oxford Dictionary, that is, an adult human female, for those of you that don't know. So, effectively, what this report is showing is that using this kind of gender-critical theory, what that will do is then allow people to then call for more hate speech legislation. That is sort of what my colleague who wrote the paper, Mark Glendenning, calls the culture control left. These individuals seek to try and control language because they believe that language is the source of these kind of power dynamics. Now, I am a libertarian. I completely believe that transgender people have the right to act freely and identify however they wish. But the fear here and the threat here is that this kind of ideology is being used to try and stifle free speech.
Okay, so can I ask, just before I move to my panel on this, I mean, what is the basis of fact in this? What justification is there for saying that if Keir Starmer gets into power, it's more likely that people are going to get prosecuted for gender-critical speech?
Yeah, he said it at a Pink News conference. Keir Starmer said that he was going to try and prosecute those individuals, and that they called it hate crimes. And effectively, that means that if you are to deny somebody else's identity using language, he would try and then prosecute on that. So he's already said that this is potentially something he's going to implement. OK,
Peter, could this be a sticky wicket for the Labour leader if any woman in the country goes into the polling booth on election day and thinks, I don't want to vote for somebody who might want a bloke in my changing room?
I think it's a sticky wicket for all politicians, and part of having a reasonable debate is admitting that. It's also a sticky wicket for a lot of pundits. But I have to say the report by the IEA, who are Liz Truss's favourite think tank, and she was not a complete success, is a vast amount of codswallop, and I hope your viewers recognise it as such. There's no suggestion at all that Keir Starmer's going to pass a law to the effect described, and I'd say the IEA is whipping up really divisive attitudes over trans issues in order to buy itself publicity. It's nonsense.
Absolutely not true. And what I will say, and I will let you jump in, but what I will say is that the report is fundamentally about free speech. We are totally, as an organisation, obviously different people have different perspectives, but we are we're liberals fundamentally and believe that these individuals have the right to act as they wish.
I also don't think the IEA needs to do this to drum up publicity. People on the left and in The Guardian manage to do it almost every day when they sort of release some report saying that they're behind something shady. It's what I find particularly interesting about this particular vehicle when it comes to free speech is this started as a predominantly a liberal thing, you know, the idea that people are free to express themselves, live their lives. And what you've got, I think it's actually quite a sad thing in a way, is that it has been leapt upon by an authoritarian tendency that in the past has focused on other things, be it racism, be it sexism, be it whatever. They've, you know, people find a cause and they leap on it as a way to say, no, you have to, you know, stand by these standards. And what I think would be, and it would be very typical of this country, is what you could inevitably get when legislation like this is passed, and inevitably it will be passed. Let's be very clear, unless somebody actually...
Really?
Yeah, actually, I do think it will be.
What's your evidence for that?
Because actually, the last Labour government that we had was very good under Tony Blair. What you'd often have is Mr Blair going to people saying, isn't it terrible that XYZ thing might happen? Don't worry, it's not going to happen. And then, lo and behold, it did happen.
But I'm sorry, that's about the past.
Okay.
That's 25 years ago.
Well, that's all I'm afraid that humanity has to go on is evidence that's gone in the past. I can't actually predict the future, but if we go on what the Labour Party's done in the past, that is the sort of thing that they do. But you'll inevitably get, when that legislation is passed, and it will be, is detransitioners being prosecuted for talking about their experiences and what has actually happened to them. That is the nightmare scenario, and it will happen.
And there's also the fear that psychotherapists would be prosecuted under these laws as well.
Well, we will have to wait and see. Hopefully it's not quite as dark and bleak a future as just been outlined there. but on that note, today, surgeons from London and Oxford have announced the massive success of the first womb transplant procedure in the UK. So, look, in its purest form, it is a big success, OK? I'm quite concerned about where it might go. So a 40-year-old woman donated her womb to her 34-year-old sister. Now, this sparked a huge debate over the potential of what this might mean for trans women, men, to have the same procedure in the future. Now, it raises all sorts of ethical concerns, as well as questions over the financing of such procedures. Reem, you are a woman, and the only woman on this panel, so I think I should really go to you first. Are you concerned that this might be another step in the erasure of women? We don't need you if we can have our own wombs.
Well, I actually might surprise you, Patrick. I don't think this is necessarily a bad thing in technological advancements. The fact that this procedure could be offered to transgender people, I am actually not too bothered about. I think that adults should be able to do that kind of thing if they wish to. This procedure could also be used for women who, you know, potentially were born without wombs or potentially...
the actual scientific side of it. I'm worried about maybe the abuse of it going forward as well.
Yeah, so there could be abuse. My problem with this particular policy is that it could be funded through our socialised healthcare system. Now, I, as a taxpayer, don't want this kind of... my money in particular to be paid towards these kind of schemes. I'm sure that other people wouldn't want that as well.
All right, Benedict, I can see you chuckling
I mean,
away.
I'm not a huge fan of the NHS, but if there's one thing that actually I would be in favour of the state funding, it's the ability for people to have more children, given that the birth rate is cratering in this country, and that leads to serious demographic issues going down the line.
So even if that meant me having a child...
I'm going to say, if there's one thing that the state should be doing, it should be saying to people, have more children, and this is absolutely one thing.
This is a way of doing it.
You know how we encourage having more children? Fix the housing crisis, encourage individuals...
I don't disagree with that. I don't disagree with that at all. But this is something that I think is not a bad thing.
OK, Peter, do you think that we should ever have a world where you or I could say, I want a womb and a baby now?
A man can't have a baby on his own, and I'm worried that parts of the right are using this great medical advancement to whip up the suggestion that a man can have a baby on his own. I've read this story in several different publications today, including different outlets, because I'm not a doctor, including the Daily Mail, and they've all celebrated it as a pioneering treatment to help women have children. It's not just a man cannot have a baby on his own. There's no suggestion as a result of this innovation that a man can have its baby on its own. And that's not just my view, that appears to be the view of scientists, commentators and doctors across the political spectrum. And we've got to be aware that silly scare stories on the fringe of society don't receive credibility when we're talking about medicine.
So you think this is overtly a thing that will definitely not in any way, shape or form, going forward, possibly ever be abused?
Well, all predictions turn out to be wrong. There is nothing...
And lots of things
there is nothing I've read today...
I certainly hope mine are.
There's nothing...
So do I. So does the world, actually, Benedict.
But also, I mean, let's look at science. You don't just need a womb to have a baby. You also need the eggs and there's lots of biology behind this.
It would take an entire
lot
frame
more
to change. Your entire body would need to be changed in a way that is currently beyond medical capability.
Hormones, blood, everything else. The idea, and I want to talk about this great advancement with respect, the idea that you just have a transplant and allow a man to have a baby is beyond nonsense. I'm worried it trivialises something that is a great advancement for women who face the sadness of not having children.
It's unequivocal that the actual initial medical benefit of this is the concern that I had was where it said in about 2 decades' time they do think that we will have achieved the ability for it to be put into men, and therefore I was concerned that this will be another boon in the argument for people who say that, look, you know, gender is not actually a thing, it doesn't really matter, it's not based on reproductive organs, we can just create them ourselves. And I can't help
I think you need to see a doctor.
You think I need to see a doctor? Yeah. Maybe I should have a brain transplant. Maybe that's the way that it is. Look, I've thoroughly enjoyed this. So go on, quickly.
Well, isn't it great that we're able to have these conversations, that this new hate speech legislation hasn't been implemented?
Yes,
because it doesn't exist. It doesn't exist.
If you're able to have the transplant in 2 years' time, in 20 years' time, then we know that we haven't won this side of the argument.
Yeah, and I will have that transplant just to spite you, Peter. I will give birth just to spite Peter Edwards. No, I've done worse. Anyway, right, thank you very much. Coming up, a large number of items have gone missing from the British Museum, which has reignited the row over the Elgin marbles and other artefacts. So, by the way, can I just say on this, right, I mean, the idea that someone... It's one thing picking up smaller artefacts and smuggling them out of a museum. If someone makes off with the Elgin marbles, then keep it. Just keep it. You deserve it. Anyway, has the museum lost all of its credibility? Have I?
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Jacob Rees-Mogg. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
Delicious.
mental?
Open your mouth. OK, here comes a train. Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Whoa!
Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it. So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel. Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There'll be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things, we've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference.
And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel. Welcome Welcome back to State of the Nation with me, Patrick Christys. And yes, you've continued to get in touch with your male mogs. Thank you very much. Ryan says, this is on the NHS womb surgery that I was talking about before. Fair enough, if you elect to have this surgery and pay for it, but it can't get to the point where these operations are offered on the NHS. We have bad enough waiting lists for surgeries already. Interesting, Ryan. Look, I'm not normally the chap to do this, of course, but obviously maybe women would have a different view and therefore maybe they should be consulted more on this, yeah? Vince says, if a man wants to believe he is a woman, that's up to him. If that man wants me to believe he is a woman, then that's up to me. Yeah, fair enough, Vince. I won't argue with that at all. Right, you might have heard of Night at the Museum, but have you heard of theft at the museum? Raider of the Lost Arts, I think, probably would have been. Yeah, oh, there it is. There we go. Now, the British Museum said last week that items from its collection were missing, stolen or damaged, and that an unnamed member of staff had been sacked from their post. It's now emerged that close to 2,000 items have gone rogue from the museum, including gold jewellery and gems that date from the 15th century BC. That's some pretty precious stuff. This scandal has, of course, reignited the row over ownership of the artefacts. Greece is now arguing that the Parthenon sculptures and Elgin marbles are not safe on British soil. If the museum can be robbed, it seems, in broad daylight. Is the British Museum an internationally respected institution anymore? Has it lost all credibility? Joining me to discuss this are Christopher Marinello, a world leader in recovering missing works of art. Thank you very much, Christopher. I mean, we need to set you on the case here, don't we? We've got 2,000 we need to recover.
I would love to be on the case. In fact, I donate my time to recovering objects for museums. And I've recovered over $600 million worth of stolen art over the years. But to get started, I need a detailed list of what has been taken from the museum, and the museum is not talking. I think they need to immediately hold a press conference and let the British public know what is missing from the British Museum.
I think you're absolutely bang on. So what we've been able to glean so far is that apparently one of the items was worth several tens of thousands of pounds. It was a Roman artefact that went on sale on eBay for £40. So whoever is doing the stealing obviously isn't the brightest person in the world. Apparently something belonging to Cleopatra and several gems, etc., etc. So you think that we need to have a full-blown press conference and have it out there? This is what's missing, therefore we've got a chance of finding it.
It's all about transparency. This is one of the most important museums in the world. And the trustees and the chairman have been completely silent. They need to come back from their vacations, put away their tuxedos, and tell the British public what has happened, how could it happen, what are they doing to recover it, and how will it not happen again? And
Do the Greeks have a point, Christopher? Look, do the Greeks have a point? You know, are the Elgin marbles safe?
Well, I know Conservative MP Timothy Loughton was very critical, saying the Greeks were being opportunistic. But let's face it, for decades, the British government and the British Museum have been very condescending and patronizing towards the Greeks, saying, well, we don't want to return the marbles for one reason, that you won't be able to take care of them. And they're better off in the United Kingdom. Well, you know, it's fair play that the Greeks are now pointing the finger, instant karma, but they know that they need to get over that issue, and we need to get to the real issue of the legal and moral authority to return Parthenon.
So, look, let's get down to brass tacks on this. You know this better than arguably anybody else in the world. When someone nicks something from a museum, a treasured artefact, I would imagine there is a select group of people that you can sell that to. Am I right? Well, how do these things get dealt?
Well, it was very clever to deal with objects that were not on display, not very well known, but were either not cataloged at all or being used for study. So this individual thought he could get away with it, fly under the radar, sell them on eBay. I mean, he didn't go to the major auction houses where he probably knew he'd be flagged right away, and tried to put it on eBay quietly and discreetly. But a dealer managed to know the object and contacted the museum. The museum had noticed that something was going on and should have contacted the police immediately.
How often does this kind of stuff happen? I mean, 2,000 artefacts. Okay, I mean that's a lot. I mean, I don't claim to be an expert of the British Museum. I mean, regular viewers of my work will know I'm not necessarily the most cultured individual. However, it sounds like a lot to go missing. Like someone should have noticed.
Several times a week, I get reports from smaller museums around the world, cultural institutions or churches, but it's very rare to happen with an institution as important as the British Museum. But 10 years ago, I had a very similar case where a curator for a Swedish museum was stealing objects just like this over a period of years, selling them, buying cars, buying clothes, and when he was confronted, he committed suicide. So the police were never able to interview him and find out where the objects went. And we're still finding some of those objects today. But the key is to have these items published throughout the media and placed on the Interpol database so that the trade can check while they're doing due diligence to help locate these objects.
I mean, it's remarkable stuff. I mean, you're shedding quite a light on this now, about the scale of which this goes on, how regular it is, and who might be out there in order to buy it. So, I mean, there will be a dedicated police team. Now, do you find it odd that it took so long for the police to be... This is what I don't get. Why did it take so long for the police to be involved in this? Was it cover-up?
Well, you know something, I think the British Museum was pretty arrogant thinking that they could handle this themselves, internally, a bunch of art historians working together, we'll figure it out. But with something like this, you need to go to the authorities immediately, because if you don't, these items could be sold, traded several times over. It makes it very difficult to recover once they've appeared in France or Switzerland and someone says, I bought them in good faith.
No, of course, and that's right. OK, very lastly then, is that going to be the other issue? So if someone has bought them in good faith, do we get them back?
Well, it depends on the jurisdiction where they end up. The US and the UK are common law countries. Civil law countries such as France and Switzerland make it more difficult. But the key is to publish on a website saying these were stolen from the British Museum.
And we have it back that way.
The world is on notice.
OK, look, Christopher, thank you very much. Really enjoyed that conversation. Right, OK, now, that's it from me. Up next is Professor Daniel Watson. Dan, what's coming up on your show?
Patrick, a slightly quieter show tonight. Although I have to say, I did enjoy it 24 hours ago. It was a very good watch. Yes, you've got time to talk to me tonight. Yeah. Have you seen... this woman, Kelechi Okafor, who is attempting to create a race war around the despicable Lucy Letby. Yeah. She has actually said that the media is presenting Letby like an anomaly when actually, when we look at it, the violence of white women is not an anomaly. It is the standard. She obviously joins Dr. Scholler and Glamour magazine. I said earlier in the week, Patrick, I was going to start calling out this anti-white racism, and so I know it won't make me popular in some quarters, but I feel it's absolutely necessary to do.
Well, call it out in any other aspect of racism.
Absolutely.
So why not that? We think we've got about 20 seconds. Dan, what else have you got?
We have Paul Burrell and Angela Levin with all of the latest royal news, and also Sharon Davies reacting to this extraordinary claim from the trans cyclist Emily Bridges that they would have no advantage competing against biological women. Sharon says that's untrue.
Yeah, great stuff, Dan. It will be gripping to watch. Thank you very much. That's wonderful stuff. Now, that's all coming up after your weather. I will be back tomorrow at 3 p.m. for my usual show. See you in a tick.
That warm feeling inside. From Boxed Boilers. Proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hi there, it's Aidan McGibbon here from the Met Office with the GB News forecast. Showers for many of us over the next 24 hours, even across southern areas where it has been relatively warm and fine over the last few days. It's going to turn cooler as low pressure starts to sink south. As that happens, some intense heat over the near continent will spark some thunderstorms through the evening and overnight, those affecting northern France, but some showery activity could just spread into southwestern parts of England and then eventually other parts of the English Channel coast overnight. Some heavier rain also affecting much of central and northern Scotland. In between, a lot of cloud cover and a warm night for many, especially towards the south. But it's in the south where we're going to see some lively activity first thing, some heavier rain predominantly, with the thunderstorms that develop across northern France generally staying around the Channel or across the near continent. Much of that moves out of the way, but still some showery rain for the southeast into the afternoon. Heavy rain moves through northern Scotland, replaced by showers. Showers also affecting Northern Ireland, but actually for northern England, West Wales, southwest England by the afternoon, plenty of fine and bright weather to come. Feeling a bit cooler, and Friday's certainly a cooler day across the UK. Low pressure will bring a northwesterly airflow, a bright start to the southeast, but elsewhere a lot of showers coming through on a brisk northwesterly breeze. In between some sunny spells and a similar setup for Saturday, a mix of sunny spells and showers and cool for many.
That warm feeling inside. From Boxed Boilers, proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain